Joe! We'll fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there. Hey, it's me, Chief Doggy Dog, joined by my co-host,
S. Chubby Chub.
That's it. Now listen, pay attention listeners, because we got a super spectacular episode of the show this time. We've got a guest in the studio, and it is the super talented Tom Showtime Scioli. That's right, you're probably going to know Tom's work from Godland, that crazy ass series he did with Joe Casey from Image Comics, and also American Barbarian, the epic revenge quest comic that Tom did. But of course, we're here today to talk about the Transformers G.I. Joe series that ran from 2014 to 2016 from IDW Comics. And without further ado, here is the main man. Tom, how are you, sir?
Doing really good. It's good to talk to you guys.
Excellent. Thanks so much for coming on. Big fans of your work.
Whereabouts in the country are you, Tom?
In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Hence the
Steeler country.
The love for Steeler.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You know, I did some stuff with Steeler that like you can only do if you're from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
You know, it was like some very specific Pittsburgh things.
I know what yins are talking about.
One of my favourite file cards, the last Pittsburgher. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Like, because that was one thing I've never seen in any depiction of like Pittsburgh in the larger media. Nobody mentions the Pittsburgh accent. Like, and it's such an exotic accent. It's very strange. I mean, I don't know how it sounds to you guys, because I mean, I'm from Philadelphia originally, same state as Pittsburgh. But when I first came to Pittsburgh and heard that accent, I was astounded.
It's thick. It's the thick, strong one, isn't it? So cool. Yeah, I'm going to cut straight to the chase. How did you get into the funny book business, and was it something that you had aspired to from a young age, or something you kind of fell into?
Yeah, I mean, it was aspirational. I mean, I wanted to, be involved in art and storytelling in some form since I was a kid. So, I, like a lot of kids, I imagine growing up to be like a movie director or an animator or making comics, one of those, or video game designer. Like those were all options. And then when I got older and got into college and stuff and sort of tried my hand at all of those different things, the comics was the one that like I most connected with and saw a future in, and then, made my own comics zines, where I do comics with some other guys and self-publish them. And then with some of the material that I had been working on for like the next zine, I submitted that to the Xeric grant, which is like a grant that was created by Peter Laird of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And it was kind of designed to help people get their start in the industry. And I got the grant and made my comic, The Myth of Eight Opus, and got it, nationally distributed to comic book shops. And that was kind of the start of the whole thing. And it just kind of rolled from there. Once you have a comic, and the Xeric grant has like a certain amount of cachet to it as well. So it kind of put me on a lot of people's radar, and I just kind of, built from there.
Yeah, that picked up some awards as well. So that's obviously good praise. Yeah. Moving on to the Godland books, etc. But this particular project, this Transformers G.I. Joe book, how did that come about?
It was really like the beginning of like a new phase of my career, because up to that point I had been doing almost exclusively creator-owned things, like Godland, and then like my self-published things. I do the odd freelance job here and there, but it was mainly like creator-owned. And I'd sort of, hit a wall with it, where I'd kind of felt like I'd sort of taken it as far as I was going to take it. And I felt like I tried to tackle that sort of like the comics career that I envisioned as a kid, like how I thought comics worked. The way I thought comics worked was you submit something to, like a Marvel or a DC, IDW didn't exist back then, but you submit it, and then it's like, okay, now you're the guy who's working on Spider-Man, and then you get your Spider-Man every month. You have this like steady supply of work, and like in the very, 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 very beginning, I'd sort of gone that route, and then didn't really pursue it any further. And so I thought, well, let me really, seriously pursue this comics thing, submitting samples and things like that. And so I looked on the internet and saw like everybody's submission policy and stuff, and I saw like IDW submission policy, and I'm like, okay, cool, and it was basically like their submission policy is different now, but back then it was submit through their message board or something. And so I submitted some art through the message board, and John Barber happened to see it, and he knew my work, and he was a fan of Myth of Eight Opus, and he was like, oh, cool, Tom Scioli wants to work with us, great. And so then we started talking, and he gave me some assignments for like cover work and stuff, and then in pretty short order, he said, hey, I got this idea of the G.I. Joe team goes to Cybertron, and I'm picturing it in like a Jack Kirby style. And so, of course, I thought of you, like, would you want to do that? And like, my head basically exploded. Like it was like he delivered something on a platter that I could like just really run with. It was just, so perfect. And I had, just like the day before we talked, I'd been looking through some of my old sketchbooks, looking at different ideas. Marvel had an anthology called Strange Tales, and I had come up with a story with that in mind, Strange Tales, and it was Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos during World War II go to Asgard, and like they fight the hosts of Asgard, because at that point, and I didn't know this at the time, but it's also, I think, canonical that during World War II, Asgard fought on the side of the Nazis. The explanation, I think it was maybe through, like Roy Thomas came up with it or whatever, but the explanation was, some kind of Loki's trickery or whatever. But my thought was that this was before Donald Blake had found Thor's hammer. Thor had been sort of dormant during this period, and that Thor is kind of like the conscience of Asgard and the link to like humanity and the earth, where the other Asgardians are sort of like more callous and less connected to humanity, and sort of and so that was my basic and it was like kind of a very similar dynamic. The Howling Commandos land in Asgard and just start like shooting everything up. It was just like too perfect that like a day later John Barber called me with like the Hasbro version of that.
Wow
Tasty. And it's a case of the little guy actually going into the jaws of hell and prevailing.
Right.
I can't imagine, like, in my mind, the Howling Commandos versus the Asgardians, surely that's over before it even began, but I'm sure through some creative writing and some plot armor that made a very compelling story. Just as Transformers versus G.I. Joe, you kind of expect the Joes to be wiped out by these massive machines of death, but they wind up becoming like an infestation.
That whole genre, like the sort of Marvel, Jack Kirby, Stan Lee genre, is all about the little guy triumphing against, great odds. And that was something I gave a lot of thought to with the Transformers, because when I'd read about sort of people who would have like Transformers and G.I. Joe, like role-playing campaigns and stuff like that, they'd always talk about how it's like so unbalanced. The G.I. Joes are so outclassed by the Transformers, just, in terms of like firepower and strength and stuff. But, as I gave it a lot of thought, I thought, well, first of all, once you possess nuclear weapons, everything's even. And I thought about how scary that would be if, sort of like bugs, which a lot of people have a lot of fear about to begin with, these tiny things that could potentially do you harm. Maybe if they had more intent, like they once said that like all the spiders on Earth could eat all of the human beings on Earth in like one day if they chose to. They just don't have the free will. So I thought of like the G.I. Joes from a Transformers perspective are these scary little gross little creatures that have agency, have free will, have tactical weapons, have nuclear weapons. That would be very scary to a Transformer, this idea of these gross meat bag little squishy things that could like sneak up on you while you sleep and
drop a virulent strain of green bombs down your throat.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of an infection, an infectious disease, I mean, those kind of themes are pretty prevalent at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As are the masks that half the characters in it wear.
I was quite interested to read in the notes in the back of. I've got the quintessential edition. In the back of the book, you've got the cribbed notes for each issue, and I was quite interested to read that one of the only G.I. Joe books you'd read prior was issue 21. Now, I'm sure there were other G.I. Joe comics that you had, but did you do a mass reread of all the Harmer stuff before taking on the project? And if that was the case, and the G.I. Joe comics weren't an everyday thing in your childhood, was it more cartoon and toy-based? Or what was your connection to these two franchises growing up?
Yeah, my connection, it was cartoon and toy. Both of them, like, I loved both the cartoons. They were kind of almost like, like Star Wars and stuff. They were sort of the mythology of, like, my childhood of the 80s. And so I just knew it through. I hadn't gone any deeper. I hadn't gone into the comics at all. And I liked both things, but they weren't, lifelong obsessions the way, some of the other things from my childhood were. But I enjoyed and was the target audience. I was like, that exact, like, age when they came. I think it was like in first grade when Transformers came out. But as I got older, like, I had heard about, through comics, I'd heard about the Snake Eyes silent issue as being this, like, legendary comic, like, separate from G.I. Joe fandom, just like, oh, here's a great comic book to show you, like, how to tell a silent story. And so I picked that up and loved it. I thought it was great. And then, I maybe had, like, one or two other, like, random G.I. Joe issues, maybe like 27 or so. I forget what number it was. And I read it, and it was all right. It didn't do a ton for me. What I later learned was that's because it was out of context. Once I got this assignment, I was like, okay, I have some studying to do, because these are, like, two properties that have, like, huge, like, obsessive fandoms attached to them. So I need to do my homework. And so I started reading, like, all the Transformers things I could get my hands on and all the G.I. Joe things I could get my hands on. And, like, I fell in love. Like, the Larry Hama stuff, I loved it. And it really was, like, the strength of it comes when you read it in context, when you read, like, a bunch of it in a row and go back to the beginning. It's really this great ongoing comic book epic that just keeps building from issue to issue. And one of the great, like, because I classify G.I. Joe as a superhero comic, despite sort of the like military trappings. I think it fits squarely into the superhero genre. And I think it's one of the great superhero comics of all times. Like, put it up there with, like, the Chris Claremont X-Men, and I was just blown away by it. And I'm a fan now. Like, I'm up to date. Like I read, the G.I. Joe Real American Hero each issue as it comes out now. I've read the entire thing up to present, and it's amazing to me that it still comes out, still the same writer, for pretty much the whole thing, and that's, like, such a rarity in comics. Like, when I think about other comics, like, how exciting that would be if, like, the original creator of, it's hard to say now because it's like, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, just died a year ago for Stan Lee and then, like, 2 years ago for Ditko. But it would be like, when they were alive, the idea of, like, if they had still been doing Spider-Man together, into the 2000s, the 2010s, It's a rarity. I guess now the equivalent would be guys from the 90s, Spawn or Savage Dragon or something. But, something from the 80s to still be going on, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
Tom, what is so special about G.I. Joe, or Transformers versus G.I. Joe, to me, is that you have paid such great reverence to what came before, but in many respects you've picked what you've wanted, cut out the rest, remixed it a bit, and come up with something so fresh that it kind of makes everything that has come before seem a little bit stale by comparison. I must say, Transformers vs. G.I. Joe has kind of spoiled me because its world is so colourful and so unexpected. I mean, to a long-time G.I. Joe reader like me, it kept me guessing. Like, I didn't know what was happening on page 23 until I turned the page, you know what I mean? It had a very, very fresh and unexpected style. What inspired you, man? Like, what lit a fire under you and said, this is the story I want to tell? Was it something that you had in mind already, or did it kind of morph through, after engaging with the source material?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I didn't have a larger intention, I'd had, like I said, just that sort of Sergeant Fury story idea, but I had a long lead time before the comic was going to come out. So I had a lot of time to think about. And also even though like for a while the project wasn't confirmed, we were still kind of talking about it as like a maybe, I saw what a huge undertaking it would be, and also what a huge opportunity. It was, really just a great opportunity. So even though it wasn't confirmed, I started working like that day that John floated it as a potential idea. I started working immediately because I knew that I had a lot of catching up to do, and I needed to go in with some momentum. So I couldn't just sort of, and I thought, what, how do I justify this? Because it was also, people around me were kind of like, why are you working? Like, that's not confirmed. Like, why are you, like, what if they don't do it? What if they don't do it? You waste. And I thought, like, well, you know what? I really like what I'm coming up with here. So if they don't do it, then I'll just make it a creator-owned thing. I'll just do, it was going to be Star Morphins versus the Icelandic army. And it was just going to be the Icelandic army fights these, like, giant robots from space if the deal falls through. And so I committed to it. It had a long gestation period, and I was able to, read all the source material and just let it percolate. And I did so much writing and rewriting. And what became clear to me was, because I thought about like Snake Eyes, like the origin of Snake Eyes. It's rooted in Vietnam. Most of the G.I. Joe characters, their origins are like rooted in the Vietnam War. And I thought, well, this made a lot of sense in the 80s when like a Vietnam vet would be in their 20s or 30s. But, in 2014, is Snake Eye, he's like an old man then. He's my dad's age, or he's so keying into the end. So it's like, okay, you have to update his origin, which I assume has happened other times, with the movies or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I have to update his origin. And then once it was like, okay, I got to update his origin, then it's like, okay, well, this whole thing's a reset then. Like I can, reset the clock and retell all the story and completely reinvent the thing. And I thought, okay, it's Transformers and G.I. Joe. It's not like Transformers meets G.I. Joe. This is its own thing. This is Transformers versus G.I. Joe. So I'm going to make it as though these characters were created for each other, as if their universe is, intertwined and, part of each other from the beginning. And so that was kind of the beginning of like the invention from the top down. And again, like I had been reading all the source material, so it was like that played a part in it and was just this great like Lego set. It was like all these building blocks I had to play with, all these amazing building blocks to create something new.
Yeah, good.
It's interesting that you say that you wanted to reset their backstories to like 2014, because nothing in the series really pegs it in a specific time frame. Like I always read it with the possibility that this could be set in the mid-80s, back in the day.
Yeah.
Nothing about the tech or, they're not walking around with touch screens, smartphones.
Well, what's interesting? Like I did so much writing for this and rewriting that sometimes I forget what made it into the book and what stayed in my sketchbooks. But that was a decision too, because in some earlier drafts, I placed it very clearly in a time. And the first adventure, like what would have been issue 0, was going to be like the hunt for Osama bin Laden. That was going to be the beginning, like where it starts. They're looking for Osama bin Laden, but instead they find Transformers. They went in the wrong cave. They end up in the cave that the Ark crashed in instead of when they're looking for Osama bin Laden. And I was working on that, and like me and John had some conversations and stuff. And it started to occur to me that comic books, that these monthly things that come in month in, month out, what they're really about is they're about the eternal present. And so any kind of like dating that I would do of the story would diminish that. Like I want every issue as it rolls out to be like, here's what's happening right now. And when you place that kind of thing of like, oh, it's World War II, or it's the 80s, or it's the early 2000s, or it's no longer the eternal present. So I sort of like abandoned the sort of the time stamping. There were some drafts where they did have smart devices, like in one of the drafts for issue 2, where they go to Cybertron, they have smartphones and they have that device, that app, which was kind of new. I forget the name of it, but it's the app where you can like hold it up to the sky and it shows you the stars and things, like their positions. And so like they were using like an app similar to that, where like, okay, there's Earth, there, so there were some where they didn't make the final cut again, because of that decision to
to keep things.
Yeah, definitely to its benefit.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to ask about John's involvement in this, but first I've got a message coming through, so if you just bear with me. It's a Transformers G.I. Joe pop quiz. It's a Transformers G.I. Joe pop quiz. Question 1. The Joes are poised for some much-deserved R&R, and luckily the Arbco Circus is in town. Unfortunately, 3 of the performers have fallen ill, a bad case of food poisoning. The show must go on though, so stand-ins are required, and the Joes are up to the task. Which Joes would you use as a best fit for the Human Cannonball, the Sword Swallower, and the Clown?
The clown would be Chuckles, just because that's a good clown name.
Yep.
The Sword Swallower would be Katana, again, because of his name. Oh, wait, is there somebody named Katana? Am I getting my universes crossed?
Quite
I'm
possibly.
not familiar with Katana.
You know what? I am getting my universes crossed. Yeah, well, I mean, I would go with Snake Eyes then. Snake Eyes.
Okay.
Sword
And the Human Cannonball?
The Human Cannonball, let's say Grunt.
Okay, fire that bastard right out, yeah.
Right, exactly. Like, yeah, he seems made for that kind of duty.
See you later.
Break and replace.
Yeah, so obviously John is credited on this book as well. And what was his involvement in terms of, you know, the writing, or was he just a soundboard for knocking ideas off of, or, you know, how did his role in this book take shape? And would it have been a different book without him?
In the beginning, like, his role sort of changed as it went on, because I was like on fire with this. It was, you know, like a state of like almost hypomania with this project. Like, so it was kind of like, after a point, you know, he was just kind of like, okay, you know, you got this. Like, I'm going to stand out of my, you know, but going into this, like, we didn't know that, like going into this. And again, like, I had collaborated with Joe Casey for like a really long time with Godland. So I had sort of had a lot of thoughts about how that collaboration was, and what, if I embarked on another collaboration, what would it be, and things. I had a lot of ideas and things. And then, you know, it took on its own thing. But initially, when John proposed that sort of elevator pitch, it was going to be just me doing it.
Okay.
And then at a certain point, you know, like, it's such a fun project, you know, like, it's a dream come true. And he said, you know, can I work on this with you? Can we like co-write it? And I thought about it, and I was like, well, and this was like very early in so I hadn't like read all the books yet, and so I was kind of like, well, he's got his writer skills that he brings, but he also has, you know, this like amazing knowledge of the characters and experience like working with the characters for years up to this point. So that would be an amazing resource. So sure, yeah, why not? You know, the more the merrier. And my philosophy about writing at that point of collaboration was, I'm just going to go in 100%. I'm going to write and write and write. And I suggest you do the same. Go off and just write and write and write, and then we'll convene from time to time and see what we got, and like smash it together and see what happens. And no egos, just like, you know, if there's an idea that, you know, needs to be thrown out, we throw it out. You know, it doesn't, you know. And so that was sort of, you know, the philosophy, like, going into it. And so for like issue 0 and issue 1 and maybe issue 0 and issue 1, you know, like, we'd each done like our, you know, we'd do a lot of talk. We'd you know, throw ideas back and forth, and then write our little scripts and then show them to each and stuff like that. And so, you know, and sort of mix and match. Again, like, this was like one job that he had. He had his sort of like editorial duties at IDW. He had other books he was writing, this and that. So I'd sort of show up with like, you know, hundreds of pages and sketchbooks and stuff. And he'd have, you know, like, you know, the script, you know, and it was just like, it became obvious that, and then a lot of times all the stuff we talked about and wrote and did, I'd like throw out and start from the beginning and come up with something totally new. There is so much cutting room floor stuff for this series. Like, it's kind of amazing. And I was recently going through some old stuff, and I found like a page that didn't make it into issue 2. And I was like, should I just like finish this page a little bit, post it online, and be like, oh yeah, this was going to be in issue 2. There just wasn't enough space. But anyway, so it was kind of like, after like the first 2 issues, then it was kind of like, okay, Tom, you got this. And so then it was kind of, he became more of sort of like a sounding board, and as it went on. But his role, even though the words you see on the page and the pictures and the story are like maybe 99 and in some cases 100% mine in some issues. The thing with collaboration, it's like what a collaboration is it's like when two people agree to collaborate. And then after that, it's not like, okay, well, who did what? Like when I study Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, it's like, who did what? Who did, like we're sort of obsessed with this. But really, like, it's like just when you agree to collaborate, then, everything else is like, who knows? Like you've collaborated. And so John had like a really important, like, first of all, he had the initial elevator pitch, which is key. So that in itself is like, super valuable. And then great sounding board, and then he did have some some stuff from his scripts for issues 0, 1, and 2 did make their way into the final cut, or maybe inspired something that made it into the final cut. So, and then from there it's like, this is our thing. And then a big thing that he did, which makes him so invaluable, is he was like the guy who squared everything with Hasbro, because Hasbro, they never heard of me. The stuff I was turning in seemed really weird to them. They were like, what is this? In the very beginning, they were not sold. John had to work very hard to sort of sell them on me, and there were some tricky moments. And then throughout the series, like, because I kept pushing the envelope and doing risky things and doing crazy things and dangerous things, the sort of things that make these sort of corporate IP holders uncomfortable. I was turning that dial up to 11, and John would have to defend these things in meetings, and there's like all these like specific examples. It's like, that's a job in itself. So that was, as it went on, those, that's how I see, the collaboration.
He was the man making all the drives down to Rhode Island.
Right. Yeah. I've never been to the Rhode Island offices. He made a couple trips there during our tenure on this book, and probably had to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations.
Well, you've opened the door to toys there, Tom. I'm dying to know, man, because you have such great fidelity to some of the key details on the actual physical toys. Did you have an assembly of toys at your desk when you were working?
I did. Like, what happened, like, especially early on when this thing was announced, it captured a lot of people's imagination, and people like around me, people in my life, friends and family. And so everybody was like offering donations of like, oh, you could borrow my collection, you can, oh, here's the complete G.I. Joe playing cards. Like, people were just giving me all kinds of donations and stuff to you, and I had some of my own thing, like I have a Snake Eyes, but yeah, it was a lot of donations and stuff, and again, there was this huge learning curve. I had to, before I started working on this book, I had to learn the mythologies, but then also like the designs, and there was a lot of like just filling up sketchbooks, just trying to like, figure out like what do these things even look like,
Well, you nailed Optimus's forearms, buddy.
Yeah.
Among other things. I mean, I could go on in great detail about the things that absolutely tickled me as a toy fan. For instance, the number 6 sticker on the front of the snake armor that Dr. Venom wears.
Yeah.
Nice touches like that, man, really. There's so much to captivate a toy fan on the page. So, yeah, I really drooled over all those details.
That was, I mean, again, like we were talking about, that was a huge part of my relationship to these series, was the toys, not the comics, the toys and the cartoons. And yeah, I would just sort of see these amazing toys and kind of, as a kid, and just sort of speculate, what does that mean? And that armor that we talked about with the 6, like, that was something that, like, what is that? And then when I saw it in the cartoon, and it was different from the toy, because in the cartoon, it was like they were robots. They were used as robots, or at least in some of the cartoons.
Correct.
But the toy was a guy in there, it's armor. And so I sort of played with it. All these like things that had sort of been percolating when I was a kid. Like, again, like I didn't have any large G.I. Joe or Transformers story in mind when I started this, but the Ultra Magnus toy I had as a kid, and I never owned an Optimus Prime. I wanted one, but I didn't own it. But I did have Ultra Magnus, which has like a little Optimus Prime inside. And so that thought, was something I played with as a kid, of like, what does this mean? That like this white Optimus Prime goes inside and becomes this totally other robot that has its own personality and its own story. Like, what does all that mean? And, and sort of coming up with different ideas, like as a kid. And then finally, as an adult, getting to play some of those scenarios out.
Enter Ghost Prime. I have that written down as like one of my hell yeah moments. Integrating the white Ultra Magnus Prime as the sort of the ghost form that Optimus takes when he comes back from the dead. That's some incredible stuff, Tom. Like as I said before, just the freshness that you brought to the series is so invigorating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it was for you guys, but the return of Optimus Prime, like in the cartoons, was a big deal. Like as a kid, it was kind of like I hadn't seen Transformers the movie in the theaters, so I wasn't one of those kids who got traumatized by seeing Optimus Prime die. But I did hear about it, and eventually it came on VHS, and so I was kind of like ready for it and stuff. And so it was like the idea, wow, Optimus Prime is dead. And then on the cartoon, they start teasing the return of Optimus Prime. It's like Optimus Prime is coming back, and it was, day after day. I think it was even a multi-part story too. So like they're building. It was a moment, like it was a real moment. So I was definitely going to do something with that in the comic.
Yeah, I tell you, some toys that I would love and buy in a heartbeat if they made them were your versions of the October Guard and US 7. Now they need to be toys of those.
Yeah, I was really happy with them, and they almost just have sort of cameos throughout they pop up here and there. But at some point in my life, I'd like to return to those two sets of characters specifically. I think they could carry their own series.
Yeah, and if you're listening, people, Hasbro, IDW, let's get that done, figures done, and let's get an IDW series commissioned for that. And also, I am going to hold you to another thing from the book, because in July 2025, I'll be eagerly awaiting the Shipwreck Space Pirate series. So let's hope that comes out. Yeah,
I had a lot of fun with the file cards and the caption boxes, and I was like very playful with them and stuff. And I thought that's another thing that could carry its own series is, and again, like all the cutting room floor stuff. Like I have, adventures of Shipwreck Space Pirate and how he, captures the Decepticon flagship Nemesis and all this stuff, and that just never, all that it makes into the book is when he shows up all of a sudden with that, and then the caption box tells you that there's a whole backstory, and it'll be in Shipwreck Space Pirate in stores in 2025. And at the time, 2025 seemed like so impossibly distant. I'm like, who knows? Maybe by then I'll get around. And now it's like, oh, it's coming up. If that's going to be a thing, maybe we gotta...
If we're all still here by then.
Yeah. You talked briefly there about the file cards, and obviously these are scattered across every single issue. And was there a conscious decision to make some of them kind of jokey and some of them just a description of what the character does, and how did you go about deciding which ones were going to be which? I mean, some of my favourites are, I love Big Lob, Dr. J with a hand grenade. I'm just picturing Dr. J going down the lane, stuffing grenades in New York Knicks pockets as he goes to slam dunk. That's just an image. I want to see that as a pin-up. And Doc, he's good with a knife, is classic, and Destro's probably my favourite one, which is Gunmaker, Life Taker, Dream Breaker, Earthshaker, Money Raker. Brilliant.
Again, I was coming into this with such a head of steam, this whole project, and prior to this, I'd been involved for maybe a year or two of just experimenting with webcomics, experimenting with the comics form, and so just had all these ideas just swirling, all this and so I was ready to experiment and then play out the results of some of these experiments in this series. And it was just how many different ways do you have to communicate story in a comic? How many different ways can you communicate information? And the audience is primed. Social media, had been around for a while by this point, and it's we are able to process all kinds of disparate information strains simultaneously, and the comics form is kind of perfect. And so the file cards were just one more way of kind of seamlessly getting more information in there. And again, the first issue of this was a 0-issue free comic book day book, and it was going to be a 15-page story, I think. They were a little shorter than a normal comic book, and it's I have this story I've been working on for months, hundreds and hundreds of pages. How do I make just a 15-page comic about, I have so many things I need to say, and so it was okay, the file cards, you got a little bit of backstory, and and they became sort of this thing where I could kind of riff and use them again, however I needed it, use them as a joke, as information, as exposition, in sort of a playful, seamless, fun way.
Yeah, very much so. It worked. It gives you a chuckle every time I read those, so that's fantastic. Another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on was, and I know, Steve, you've probably got an opinion on this as well, what particular part of the book are you most pleased with in terms of you see as the series high point, that where you're most proud of the contribution you made to these two franchises and the mythos surrounding these franchises? And then, Steve, maybe you can say what your favourite part was, and then I'll add my one.
Tough to pick. Go ahead, Tom.
It is hard to pick. I mean, because to me, there's sort of two. There's like the very beginning of the series where I sort of come in with so much energy, and again, since I had such a long lead time, I was like champing at the bit to kind of just let this stuff out. So like issue 0, I've never spent 6 months writing a 15-page comic before, because I was writing like the whole series, but again, that was the first issue, so I got to pour all. So technically, it was like 6 months to write 15 pages. So I got to sort of perfect it. It was like exactly the way I wanted it to be. And when that came in, I thought, you know what? Like when I had my sample copy of it and I read it, I'm like, this is the best I have to offer. Like this is it. Like, and if you don't like this, then I don't know what to tell you. I can't do anything for you. Like, you're gonna have to read somebody else's comic, because this is the best I got. This is it. And then it came out and it was a huge hit, and the whole thing just went from there. It was great. But like in that moment before it came out, it was like, this is the and so like I really have strong feelings about that 0 issue. But like I feel like the best issues are the ones like towards the end, because there's kind of like the beginning, I come in with a full head of steam, and then there's the point where it's like, okay, now I don't have 6 months to make these issues anymore. I have a month or 2 months, or you're under the gun from that point on. So it's like, it's all a blur. Like I don't remember. But then towards the end, I was like, okay, this book is late. The little scheduling hiccups and missed deadlines all along have like accumulated to the point where like the book, I had planned for it to take me a year. It took me 2 years. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to worry about the schedule. I'm going to just take all the time it takes to make these. And so the last couple issues I'm really proud of, like the starting with the issue with like that centers around Scarlet, the Scorponok thing, like that to me was like this like golden era where the series like those are the heights of it. You have sort of like the manic heights of the early issues, and then the later issues. I'm so proud of that body of work in the last like third of the series.
What about yourself, Steve?
Oh, buddy. Too many to mention, but Tom, you hit the nail on the head, man. My favorite single issue has got to be Headmasters, which is the Scarlet, very introspective, trying to fight her way out of the mind control of Scorponok and Dr. Mindelbinder. But getting back to issue 0, and obviously the stakes were very high, it being Free Comic Book Day, and the kind of the distribution and the amount of eyes on that issue would be bigger than any other issues. It was kind of a make or break moment.
Bigger than any comic I've ever done in my life. That issue.
No pressure, buddy.
Right.
I'm really captivated by the silent interlude 1 page, where Snake Eyes, the unmasked Snake Eyes, finds himself in Cobra Commander's car lot and encounters Starscream. And it is very poetically written. Of course, there's no dialogue because it is silent interlude, but it is full of poetry, man. Are the words yours?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like I'd say probably like 90 to 100% of the words are mine in these books.
Buddy, they are so sublime. Like, I would blow this up and put this on my wall. When the gods of war close a window, they sometimes open a door. Salvation is a gold bug. I mean, it's got great meter. I mean, it kind of reminds me in a way of Larry's file cards on the backs of the action figure cards. There's a kind of a rhythm to it, which is just so well measured. So hats off to you, man.
Thank
but as
you.
I say, my top honors goes to your work on Headmasters. Fantastic. And full of interesting, fresh takes on how the Headmasters come about, how Scarlet faces her demons. I mean, it's got a lot of bite. That issue is hard as hell, man. it's bloodthirsty, and it's a trial by fire for Miss O'Hara. Yeah, man, riveting stuff. It's a great standalone issue. I would recommend that first to anyone who's considering the series. I'd be like, have a little taste of this. It'll blindside you.
I mean, those later issues, starting with Headmasters, that was also like, some of them are some of the earliest ideas I had. I had like a bunch of ideas sort of before I really dug deep into the mythology of these things, and then the shape of the story started to take more sort of inspiration from the originals. But that was one. That and like the Destro story, those were stories that I'd kind of had like a version of at the very, very, very beginning, like in my earliest, sort of idea, like those. And so having them sort of gestate for all that time, and then when their moment arrives in the story, it's like, they were very, very fully, like I said, like just, I'm really proud of that last chunk of the series. And to your point about the writing in the silent interlude part, like as a creator, I was kind of in a transitional point. Up to this point, I had been kind of defined by my fandom and devotion to like the work of Jack Kirby, like very intentionally. So, like I wanted to make work that was like Jack Kirby. But when John approached me about working on this series, I had sort of started moving away from that in a big way, and then it was kind of like, oh, we have this thing, and we want you to bring the Kirby. And so I was bringing something like very different than Kirby, and, Hasbro was kind of like, oh, well, we kind of signed on for like a Kirby thing. If you can't do Kirby, maybe we'll find some. So, and you sort of see the Kirby kind of like fade away as the series goes on. But it was like, I enjoyed working in the Kirby mode. That is a mode I'm very comfortable with. I love, I had just sort of moved on to sort of other things, but I was like, if you want Kirby, I can do Kirby. And writing and drawing in the Kirby style is so much fun. So that issue 0 is like, it's almost like the last hurrah for like my Kirby mode. And like the writing in that Snake Eye Silent Interlude, it was like, okay, I am going in that particular page, because all the different pages, each page has a different approach to making comics. And on that Silent Interlude page, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do the like sort of classic Kirby approach. 6 panels, heavy narration, and purple prose. And so I just went to and again, like I said, that kind of writing is the most fun writing. Like for the writer, it is so much fun. So I was just kind of playing to a strength, to a muscle that I'd sort of developed, to a really good extent by that point.
Yeah, and I think you kind of said it as well there, that that Kirby style was kind of very prominent in those first few issues, and then it does mute or fade away a little bit, and then we get more of your kind of recent style. And also there was a few pages very kind of Frank Miller-ish as well, kind of Dark Knighty, I thought, in there, obviously intentional. But in terms of my personal favourite kind of punch in the air moment, there's a few little bits that I liked, smaller moments, such as Dr. Venom being pronounced Dr. Phenom. I thought was a fantastic bit. And you also mentioned in the notes that you think he's one of the greatest comic book villains of all time.
Yeah, up there with the Joker. Again, he was new to me. He never showed up in the cartoons. I don't remember. There wasn't a toy. I don't remember him. And so as I'm reading these, I'm like, I fell in love with the character. I'm like, this guy is great. This guy is like, he's like so evil, and he knows it, and he loves it, and he almost knows he's in a comic book even. Like he just popped. He just really stood out, and I'm like, I'm doing something with this guy. Like this is a star here.
Yeah, definitely. I love CoverGirl getting married to Brawn. I thought that was good. My Little Pony showing up at the end. That was very good. I think one of my favourite issues, because I can't really pinpoint one, but it's one that doesn't really involve many Transformers for the meat of the issue, and it's actually issue 11, the Duke versus Falcon issue. Yeah. Because that is, I'd just come off, when I did the reread, I actually read that issue yesterday. I just watched Rocky 4, in fact, the night before, and, I was full of kind of pumped up 80s superhero-esque movies, and just the reminiscence of Arnie movies and Stallone, and this kind of blown up action. And it's just there's a lot to it, though. There's a lot of big moral compass to that issue that you did, and it harkens back to issue 82 from the original run, that training camp issue. and also the Operation Wingfield, which I think is maybe number 4, possibly. But yeah, that issue, again, you know, in the grand scheme of things of the whole story, there's not many Transformers involved, so it's in some ways the most grounded, non-balls out the bathtub crazy issue, but I don't know, something about it really resonated and hit me hard.
Yeah, all that like sort of 80s cinema, you know, stuff like Heartbreak Ridge and the was the Richard Gere
Officer and a Gentleman. That was like a, you know, big Top Gun, like all that kind of stuff. And yeah, like the way the Transformers figure into that, it was like, because all this like ground level training that they're doing is training for going to Cybertron and fighting giant robots. Yeah. So like they're kind of there in the back, like there'll be like cardboard cutouts of them that they shoot at or you know, jump over or whatever of the Transformers. Yeah, Jet Hook Fu, love it.
Yeah.
Tom, I think you're the first person to really give some meat to the bones of Falcon and Duke's brotherly relationship. You know, the shared mother, different father, you know, Duke getting the rod, as it were, and Falcon very much more getting the carrot.
Again, like as a kid, I knew, like I watched the G.I. Joe movie, like the animated movie, and so like it's kind of like, okay, he has a brother named Falcon, he's got a different last name, he, you know, and his brother's like a screw up, and he's very serious, and they don't look alike. Like they don't look like brothers. They, you know, Duke's sort of blonde and Falcon is, you know, dark haired and even, like he's like Italian American like myself. Yeah. And so I'm like, so the webs start weaving and you're like, what's the story there? And it just kind of, that sort of curiosity as a child sort of, again, it had decades to germinate. And so it, you know, comes out in that.
A few other master strokes, making Cutter the hairdresser genius. And another brother connection that I think you might have been the first one to make was Soundwave and Shockwave.
Right, yeah, they have the same last name.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Speaking of which, we do have to take a quick interlude because it's time for a Transformers G.I. Joe Pop Quiz. It's Transformers G.I. Joe Pop Quiz question 2. It's dark. The sun is setting, and the big bots are coming out to play. Play music, that is. It's a cassette party battle. Soundwave ejects Ravage and Frenzy to battle Blaster and his cassettes. What music's encoded on Ravage and Frenzy?
I sort of had this in mind because there's a point in Transformers vs. G.I. Joe where they hold Blaster up in the air and he's projecting a sound that like destroys stuff. And so, of course, I pictured it being... you know, Peter Gabriel, In Your Eyes, you know, from Say Anything. So I'll go with that on one of the tapes.
Okay, nice.
I get so lost sometimes. Days pass and this emptiness fills my heart.
Was it always planned to be a free comic book issue and a 13-issue maxi series, or was there ever an option for it to be an ongoing?
From the beginning, like we had talked about it just to sort of present it as an on, not say like, oh, by the way, guys, this thing's ending in you know, but like our plan was we'd work on it for, you know, 12 issues, and then that would be that. Do like a Watchmen, do a complete story. And then the free comic book day came in, so it's like, oh, okay, now it's 13 issues, you know, but yeah, it was always planned to be a discrete, but again, like I was coming in with this full head of steam and I was like, you know what, like I don't want to spend my whole life working on Transformers or whatever, like, but you know what, this is so much fun. If by the end of it, like we'll tell our story, and if by the end of it I'm like, sign me up for more, I want more, then we'll keep it going. But yeah, other than like if I'm feeling like the inspiration to keep going, the plan, yeah, was just a discrete story, and so it ended up being, yeah, like it was 13. It was 13 issues, and was it 13 issues and the free comic book day, or was it 12 issues? It was something, but it was, and then the last issue is like double length. But it was like the initial intent was to do like a Watchmen, do a 12 issue thing.
Yeah, it was 13 issues and the zero.
Yeah, and
then you did a sort of a movie treatment, which was a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, that was something because I thought like, oh, maybe we could do like an annual at some point. So I came up with that script, And it was largely based on sort of like the story I had come up with before I went deep on the source material. But it was just this very nice little concise telling of like the whole story. And like, I was really happy with
It's like a trailer, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. It's
sizzle reel.
I sort of had these ideas about comics based on movies, and how you're just looking at like a very, very condensed version of like this other thing. And so that's what I wanted to make, this very, very condensed version of this like other thing that actually doesn't exist.
Well, it worked. It was a nice little end piece, because in the back as well, there's interviews with the fake actors who were taking part in the movie, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that I viewed it as almost like a victory lap. Like, if I get out of this alive, like if I finish this whole series, then I'm going to do that script as like, okay, yeah, victory lap, like, okay, this was fun, just like this fun way to go out. Then sort of like the idea of doing these like, fake interviews and like behind the scenes of the production of the Transformers versus G.I. Joe movie, when I added that element of it, then it really, took on its own, like then it became this like worthwhile project in its own right, not just like an addendum to another project.
Yeah. I did want to ask you about a character that for pretty much most of the book is coming off the worst of anyone, and that's Billy. He kind of ends up part human, part robot, part lizard, and I was feeling sorry for this guy for most of the story, but then at the end he kind of dons the mask and becomes Snake Eyes 2.0, and he's got the Cobra emblem, and then he's kind of a force for good almost at the end. Was that an arc that you were always trying to tell with Billy, or was he always just going to be a tragic figure?
Well, I mean, Billy, again, that's like another character I didn't know about before I started diving into the research. And yeah, like reading it with fresh eyes. Like, I'm reading these 80s comics from my childhood that I had never read before. So it was kind of this like time travel kind of thing. So I'm reading all those Hama issues, and Billy really is like just all the worst things that can happen to him. He's almost like a martyr figure. He's like sort of like a classic, just getting like beaten up by the world and taking it through suffering grace, that kind of dynamic, like very like old, cut from a different kind of storytelling cloth than your typical comic book. I amped that up in this, where like he really he was going to catch the worst of it. And he has like all these good intentions, like his good intentions don't keep the world from beating him up, and he gets it from every angle. He gets the G.I. Joes beating him up. Snake Eyes, probably does him the worst, but it's like he is sort of like a central figure in this whole. I mean, he's in like the New Gods or whatever, he'd be Orion. He's like Darkseid's son, or Luke Skywalker, or Christ, or Harry Potter. He's this like central character. And he has to go through this like real trial by fire, and then of course by the end becomes stronger as a result.
As well as the October Guard and US7 spin-off and the Shipwreck Space Pirate spin-off, I now want to see a team-up book with Harry Potter, Christ, Billy, I forget whoever the other ones were, but I want that spin-off book.
Tom, was it always your plan for General Flag to be played by Larry Hama? Because that was one hell of a reveal, buddy.
From early on, I had, and I like that he's got these sunglasses. So like there's going to be some kind of reveal when he takes this. And so I considered different options, and it's like, okay, maybe he'll take off the glasses and he's the hard master. Or maybe he takes off the glasses and he's me. Maybe he takes off, maybe he takes off the glasses and he's Larry Hama. Like I had all these like different, like I wanted there to be a reveal. And then as it went on, it's like, okay, there's only one person it could be, and it's got to be, Larry. His name is Larry, So, I had to do it, and tip of that, because like, so much of what this series is like a huge tribute to what he did, and a lot of the energy I got working on this was fueled by just how much I enjoyed those G.I. Joe comics. It was like so invigorating. I really, really fell in love with the comic. I didn't expect that to happen, and I fell in love with the comic, and it really, informs a lot of what happens in this. So I had to, whether he likes it or not, I had to tip my hat to Larry and give him the tribute, because I'm a fan for life.
Are you aware of whether he's read the book or not?
Well, I mean, I would assume he has not, because he pretty famously says he doesn't read anybody else's G.I. Joe comics. He doesn't want to know. He, and even like Chuck Dixon is like a close friend of his. He doesn't read the Chuck Dixon stuff. So that's pretty famously out there. So I would assume he has not read. I hope maybe he's heard about them. Maybe somebody said, "Oh, it's great. I love," and it's a huge tribute. And hopefully, he's comfortable with that. But who knows? We put these things out there, and they're for the world.
Well, I'd like to think he'd be pretty tickled that he was the general who was pretty much calling the shots in the book. It's very, very Larry to be the old campaigner.
Yeah, definitely, I can see that. Now it's time for It's a Transformers G.I. Joe Pop Quiz. It's a Transformers G.I. Joe Pop Quiz Final Question. So, 8-year-old Tom is on a 4-hour road trip. He's stuck in the back of the car with some music blaring that he just doesn't care for. What toys or games does he play along the way to pass the hours?
Well, I get car sick if I try to read in the car, especially when I was a kid sitting in the back seat. I remember getting sick reading the the Raiders of the Lost Ark comic book adaptation. But we on car trips we used to have these little board games that were magnetic and they were flip. They're like known, you can like find them on eBay or whatever. But I forget the name. They were like called like 3-in-1 or flips or something. And there was these magnetic pages that you would flip through, and each page would have a different board game with magnetic pieces, and it would be like it was like triathlon or Olympics or themed was the one. So it would probably be that.
Cool. I'm trying to think what I used to do on car journeys. I think I would try to read but get car sick, and then next time I'd think, well, that was just a one-off. I'll try it again, and just repeat it over and over again.
Right, yeah. Like in the movie Napoleon Dynamite, he like takes like a little like He-Man, like a wrestling figure, and ties a string to him and throws him out the window and drags him. Like, I wish I would have known about that when I was a kid, because that would have been fun.
Not for the action figure.
Yeah, I wonder how many destroyed toys that would have led to, though.
Ouch.
Yeah.
I'll go one for you, Tommy.
Yeah, go on.
Do you feel like there were any missed opportunities, things that if given more time you would have liked to have circled back or have introduced more fully and more expanded on, instead of kind of, paying as much lip service to a broad base of characters as possible, but not necessarily getting to get down to the brass tacks of each and every one of them?
I like that approach. Like, I prefer having a huge cast to work with and go as deep as I want to or as shallow as I want to. I don't enjoy going super deep on one character typically, but for the series, I feel like it's all there. Like, I did my thing with it. I told the story I wanted to tell. There were some, it's like you can either go this way or that way, and so you go this way, and as a result, you can't go the other way. So there's some of those, and like the time we're living in right now, I've been sort of like looking through old sketchbooks and going through old stuff, and there's so much cutting room floor material for this.
Globulus and Pythona, perhaps? Those are the cameos that really jumped out at me. I was like, whoa, there they are. Unmistakable.
It's such a rich universe. You could just like take like almost any random element and just run with it. So the material exists. Like if I chose to, I could devote a year of my life or whatever to pursuing any of these things. But at the moment, it's not what I want to do. Maybe next year I'll be all fired up about doing like. One thought I'd had was, if I were going to do this over again, or if I was going to do a sequel or whatever, it would just be like Snake Eyes riding around the country in the Optimus Prime, truck, going from town to town, like an 80s TV show, like Magnum P.I. or Knight Rider or BJ and the Bear or whatever, like going from town to town, and like each issue is like they get involved in some kind of, thing in that town, solve the problem, and then get back in the truck and like move on to the next town. Like that I keep thinking about that. And again, like I could really, but no regrets, nothing where it's like, oh, we should have gotten that in there. There was one issue that I had written, and then I was like, you know what, we can't do this issue right now. We're going to do, and so then we did something else. So there's like kind of like a whole issue where it's like, it's young Optimus Prime, young Megatron, young Alita 1, and a point where like they're all friends, and so before things go sour, And it was kind of like a sweet, really, kind of beautiful story. And but again, the time wasn't right for it in the series, like where I was going to put it. So I just kind of like put it aside. So that, that could be a pretty cool, standalone comic at some point.
I'm so desperate now to add that to the list of other comics I want to see you make. So, yeah.
Tom, I've really enjoyed this reread, buddy. A few things that jumped out at me that never did before was the panel where Baroness is being chatted to by Crystal Ball, and he's kind of like divining that there's a child coming. And you quoted issue 14 from the classic run, where she has a single line of text, which is, "I'm late."
Yes.
And I had not realized before what that is in reference to, or you've kind of changed the context of that panel. Brilliant.
Towards the end of the series, I had so much fun with that, of just like taking panels, and doing collage and taking panels, because again, such great work. That the Hama G.I. Joe is just amazing. And there's even like in one of the last issues, there's a couple pages. Well, I fully reprinted the funeral of General Flag, except I made it, General Hawk. But those were the moments where I'm like, okay, I'm really having fun. Like, I'm really getting away with something here. Like, this is so much fun.
Oh man, brilliant Easter eggs. And there was the double page splash with the Decepticon army facing off against the Autobot army, and for the first time I realized, hang on, you have illustrated over their box arts with Devastator, with the Insecticons. Fantastic, man. It's very rewarding to a long-time toy fan.
Yeah, definitely. I think in some of the notes in the back of the book as well, you kind of mentioned you wanted to be a close inspection that warrants rereads, because every time you read it and on that page, each page, you'll see something else. There's lots of fine details there, and I think this is... when I finished it, I was like, right, I've got a lot of things to do, and especially paying work. But my first thought was, shit, I want to read this right now. So, yeah.
Tom, really fantastic pleasure to make your acquaintance, man.
Yeah, it was good talking to you.
I'm a big fan, brother.
Listen, we have taken up a lot of your time here, Mr. Showtime Scioli, so we appreciate you coming on. I hope the listeners have had a blast. I've certainly had a fantastic time, and it's been a true honour to get you on and get your thoughts on this seminal book, which I think will go down in both Transformers and G.I. Joe history as one of the all-time greats. So thanks so much for coming on. If the fine people out there want to take a look at your other work and what you've got coming up, where can they find your stuff?
Well, I've got a new book coming out in July from 10 Speed Press. It's called Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. And it's a comic book, it's a graphic novel, whatever you want to call it, big fat comic book that tells the story of Jack Kirby's life from birth till death, and then his legacy, his effect on pop culture. And I'm so proud of it. It's a labor of love, and I can't wait for everybody to see it.
That sounds amazing. Sign up, get that. I know I will be. And I actually have one more question for you. I have read sporadically here and there Jack Kirby comics, but I've never actually read an extended run by him. Shame on me, Chief. And can you just recommend me maybe one or two good, they're all good runs, but good for someone who's coming in having never read an extended Jack Kirby run? What kind of two books should I be dipping my toes into?
Well, New Gods and Mr. Miracle, and they have currently in print, there's like a Jack Kirby's New Gods volume, there's a Jack Kirby Mr. Miracle volume, so easy to get your hands on. Read those. They're great. They're perfect. Like, to me, they're the high point of his work. They're his best stuff. And yeah, they're accessible. They have like the beginning, middle, and end of each of those stories.
Perfect. Done. I'm going shopping right now. Okay. Once again, we'd like to thank Tom for coming on, and we will see you down the road. Yo, Joe.
Yo, Joe!